Hi, I'm Cameron Harmon, and my strategy area is daring reading, and my content area is science. And what I chose to do was concept maps. So I'm going to show you something I pulled from my strategy notebook. This is what I'm doing right here. I'm going to share with you the steps for a concept map really quickly. Number one is the teacher will model how to identify the main idea or major concepts in the text as students read. Number two, organize the ideas into categories and remind students that this can change as they read. So as students are reading, the categories can change as they continue on. They won't stay the same. For each student, their concept maps may look a little differently than their partner or the next student. So it's important for them to remember that. Number three, use lines or arrows on the map to represent how ideas are connected to one another, a particular category, or the main concept. Limit the amount of information on the map to avoid frustration. That last bit of information is particularly important, I think, because you don't want to overwhelm the students with a whole bunch of information on the map. In a second, you'll see my example of a concept map, and you'll see that I have a limited amount of information in the bubbles. When students start filling them in, you don't want them to have a whole bunch of bubbles around the main idea, so they're not overwhelmed and they're not trying to fill them all in and have a whole bunch of text or information all at once. You want them to focus on just a few categories at a time, so that way they don't have a whole lot going on. Once students have finished the map, have them share how they made the connections. So students can work individually and then they can share afterwards with their partner or with their table or with the class, or if they're working together, they can share when they're making their concept maps, they can share together how they made those connections, how they got from their main idea or from their concept to their categories. How did they get there? And number five, encourage students to use the map to summarize the text. So once they finish that map, how did they come up with all that and summarize their reading? So have them use that whole map just by looking at it to summarize it. So the strengths from using a concept map is that it helps students organize new information, and it can be used to help students in any content area. So it's not just for science, as you would figure. It's for social studies, it's for English language arts, it's for anything. And they're very simple to use, and they're very simple to model, and students can catch on to them fairly quickly. So here's my example on my strategy notebook, and I actually made a larger one. So that way it'll take up my whole screen for you. So in the middle, we have the main idea, the main concept. So this is weather. And then out to the side, we have categories that branch off from it. So at the top right here is clouds. So this one being the main idea concept, and this first category is clouds. So students can go from here to clouds. And then they could branch off even further and say, oh, okay, well, what type of clouds? And if they wanted to, well, what type of clouds? And they could branch and branch and branch further from that and make those connections that we talked about earlier. And out here, weather to temperature. Well, what are the different types of temperature? So they could branch off from those categories from there. So then we have weather, and then here's air. So there's another category. And so as a teacher, you can get some of these categories started. You could do, one or two, or you could get, have these blank concept maps, or you could, have just the main idea here for them. There's really a different bunch of different ways that you could do this for your students. Or you could have weather here, and you could have air and rain, and then have your students do 3 more for you, and so on. But I mean, there's so many different ways that you can differentiate this for your students and for your class to see what works the best for each individual student in each individual group, depending on your classroom. So from weather to rain, you could, direction of the rain, if it was light, if it was heavy. And then these two could connect. So your students can make that connection as well. And if they don't see it, well, there might be another group of students that do see it. And as in step number 4, they can share how they made that connection. So it helps them visually see, oh, well, we made that connection because we saw it here, instead of just having to think, oh, okay, well, how did these two connect? We actually got to see it on this paper and share it with our, peers. Okay, well, this is how we did that. So others can help each other see those connections. And then we used it to summarize what was going on in the text. So that's another way that these can be helpful, because they're actually seeing what's going on, and then they can share it together, and they're helping each other. And then the last one is wind. Well, we can make the connection rain and wind, clouds and winds. Some of those students, like I said before, can make those connections with each other. Other students might not, and then you as a teacher can help them make those connections. So here's a bigger example of that. And I believe that's it. My rationale, I chose to use concept maps during reading strategy for science because each bubble can be expanded on fairly easily by the students themselves or with the help of the teacher. Then the students could continue on with the discussion even further based on how far they branch their concept out, which I touched on when I was showing the example of the science concept map. So that's why I chose to use concept maps for science. And that's it. Thank you.